Dear friends, I welcome all of you for this lecture 9, organized by Ecumenical Christian Center on the theme Sound of Silence and the Role of Music in the Pandemic Caribbean Context. Today we'll be listening music from Caribbean context. We shall listen prelude Caribbean music. I request Tanmanlun Wepe to play the music, please. Thank you so much. It's incredible indeed. Let me introduce Professor Mario Sixto Gonzalez from the Republic of Argentina. Professor Mario is university professor. He taught both graduate courses and undergraduate courses. He's also a business consultant, licentiate in business administration. His subjects are human resources, neuro-linguistic programming, and he taught in National University of Carboda, Blaise Pascal University, Aeronautical University, Arcor University, Catholic University of Carboda. Professor Mario, we are very fortunate with us. I kindly invite Professor Mario to offer word of prayer, please. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Gracias, God. We thank you and praise you for everything as we begin this online meeting. Today we bring your presence with us. We take your peace, your grace, your mercy, and your perfect order. Thank you for amazing power and work in our life. Thank you for your godness and for your blessing over us. Thank you that you are able to bring hope through even the toughest of time, strengthening us for your purpose. Thank you for your great love and care. Thank you for your mercy and grace. Thank you that you are always with us and will never leave us. Thank you for your incredible sacrifice so that we might have freedom and life. We thank you for the vision of the Ecumenical Christian Center, Bangalore, India, for its purpose in the society. Bless Ecumenical Christian Center abundantly. We remember the vision of Reverend Dr. N.A. Thomas Ashen for his uncompressing vision as all human beings are one, irrespective of their color, creed, caste, denomination, and religion. We thank you for this online webinar and the theme, Sound of Silence and the Role of Music in the Pandemic. So far, we had 8 seminars. Today, we are on 9th seminar on music from Caribbean Island by Reverend Sanya Beharry. We come to you today virtually asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage the meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community. We thank all the participants, resource persons, ECC Director, Professor Reverend Dr. Sean P. Thomas Ashen, and ECC Program Executive Reverend Sukuma Babu, and all the staff members of ECC. Bless them abundantly. As we start this webinar on music from Caribbean Islands, continue to bless us and teach us. We thank today resource persons, Reverend Sanya Beharry and Reverend Albion, today moderator, Reverend Josephat Sinkara from Zambia, and all the people here. Bless our online lecture. We seek your blessing, and peace. We pray this prayer in the name of the unique God, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Professor Mario Sixto Gonzalez. Let me introduce the moderator of this webinar. We have Reverend Josphat Sinkara, an ordained pastor, minister of God in the United Church of Zambia. He has completed Bachelor of Theology as well as Masters in Religious Studies, currently serving in the Western Presbytery at Lilelelo congregation in the Republic of Zambia. Reverend Josphat Sinkara, we are delighted to have you as a moderator.
Thank you so much, Reverend Babu.
I knew Josphat Sinkara for the past 10 years. We both met in Fiji Islands, my brother and my friend. He's also an excellent dancer. We are fortunate to have you as moderator, Pastor. And before I give this time to the moderator, Reverend Josphat Sinkara, Reverend Sanya, she will officially introduce Reverend Sanya. Today she is in another work, so Reverend Sanya sent a video. We also have a principal of St. Andrew's Theological College in the Republic of Trinidad, by name Reverend Andrian D. Sunarai. Principal sir, we are very fortunate to have you. After the video of Sanya, the principal sir will give some session on music and songs, and later any questions he will address the people. Now I give this time to Reverend Josphat Sinkara to moderate this session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be moderator. And welcome everyone to our ECC lecture number 9, where we'll be reflecting on the sound of silence, on the role of music in the pandemic. And today we will look at the Caribbean context. What is the understanding of sound of silence on the role of music in the pandemic from the Caribbean context? And our presenter is Reverend Sanya, is Beharry, who is coming from the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean islands. And I will give an opportunity yet again for Reverend Babu just to help us in the lecture that has been given for today. Thereafter, I will ask questions, raise concerns on the same, and also additions are very much welcome. Reverend Babu, you can help us with the lecture so that afterwards we'll be able to do our reflections accordingly.
Sure, Reverend. Middle video, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and blessings to you all on this Easter Monday. You now know I am Reverend Sanya Beharry with the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, and it really is my honor to be with you, even though this is pre-recorded, and I am sorry I cannot be with you live right now, but I do hope that this time we spend together provides some insights into the Caribbean and how we have viewed music as well as silence in our society as well as within our church context. The first thing that I would have to ask you is if you know where the Caribbean is. It might sound a little funny, but a lot of times we travel internationally and people may have heard the name, or they might associate a particular person. For those of you who follow cricket, Brian Lara would be the name that comes to mind. And if you give a map to that person, they would not be able to figure out where on earth Trinidad and Tobago is. So to start off with a little context, I'm going to try a share screen to see how this works and to help us situate ourselves. So we have North America, we have Florida up to the top here, we have Central America on your left, we have South America, and you can see Venezuela and Guyana, Suriname, French Guyana. And then there is this chain of islands between the two that make up the Caribbean, starting at the top from Bahamas and coming all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago, but also including both Guyana and Suriname, as well as French Guyana. What is the thing that holds us all together? What makes this very diverse set of islands something that we can call the Caribbean as one body? The thing about the Caribbean is that we share a history of colonialism. We share a history of being a conquered people and a place where persons migrate to forcibly and otherwise. And as a result of all of the different countries that have colonized these places, it makes it our commonality, that history. It's also the thing that separates us. And so we have many different languages spoken across these tiny islands. So there are those islands who speak English. There are islands that speak French. There are some where Spanish is the dominant language. There is Dutch, as well as some indigenous languages, such as in Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao, that speak a mix of all of the above in a language called Papiamentu. And so with those different languages and the different cultures on the father and mother countries that have populated them, we ended up with a mix of people to go with it. The original first peoples of the Caribbean were called the Kalinagos and the Tainos. And they all also have been given the names of Caribs and Arawaks, and a false narrative put on them as some of the most warlike people, the Caribs, and even considered cannibals. And then there was a narrative that the Arawaks were a peaceful people. But as history has shown us, we like to create a narrative that's comfortable for us so we could explain genocide. And it didn't hold true as historians dug to find out what really happened to our first people. And what we did find is that our first people, who we refer to as the Kalinago and the Taino, they have been here before Christopher Columbus decided to land in 1492. And because of that supremacy, genocide became the order of the day, as they were enslaved and hunted and killed for fun. And lots of their culture was lost over time. And so if you are trying to find indigenous cultures and even music attached to the Caribbean, it is still very difficult to find. Further south, in terms of Guyana and Suriname and French Guyana, because persons were able to go deeper into the landmass and be able to hide almost, their populations remain a lot stronger than those of the islands. But in general, these populations are minuscule. And so the settlers that came here from England and from Spain and from Portugal and from France and from Holland, they had their planted classes set up, mostly looking for gold and soon realizing that there was very little gold to be found. And then sugarcane became the order of the day, and the persons needed a labor force that was cheap and easy to control. And thus was born the transatlantic slave trade, where the colonists would capture and enslave persons from the west coast of Africa, have them brought into the Caribbean to work on those fields, and then the goods, the sugar, all of the raw materials shipped back to Europe. And because of that, there was that forced transplanting of an African population into the Caribbean. Now, some islands had slavery running for a much longer time than others. So for instance, in Hispaniola, that's the island made up of Haiti and Dominican Republic. It's one island, but it's two nations, two separate languages as well. One is French speaking and one is Spanish speaking. They've had a history of these enslaved persons being brought to their island and forced into labor. And so Haiti is known as the first place that had a successful slave revolt in overthrowing their government and seizing control for themselves. But with that victory also came a lot of pain and suffering, because other nations found a way to punish them for their insolence of freedom. And so there are heavy debts and heavy loans, and it crippled the economy since the late 1700s, even to today. And then you have countries such as my own, Trinidad and Tobago, and that was the southernmost pair of islands. It's two islands, one nation, Trinidad and Tobago, where, because there was no hope for gold and it was a fairly small island, it wasn't seen as worthy of really developing and more persons settling. But eventually the fertile grounds drew more persons into our system. And as our population grew, we recognized that some cultures were allowed to flourish, some types of music were celebrated, and others were demonized. And one of the first types of music and cultures that were demonized is that of our African brothers and sisters, especially that of drumming. Drumming became seen as something very subversive, something that allowed persons to send messages based on the beats of the drum. And it was also part of their spirituality. And so drumming became the element that was used to invoke the spirits, invoke the presence of orishas and other deities. Drumming became the thing that persons went to express their sense of community. So there's a circle of drummers, or there is a band that has matching drumming occurring within it. But as persons recognized the subversive nature of this drumming became outlawed in the late 1800s. And when that happened, persons who wish to still convey that sense of spirituality, of being able to call into being one of their deities, decided to get around the problem by using bamboos. So they would cut bamboo and create their drumming rhythms based on that, and it was called Tambu Bamboo. It's a very fun name, but something also that showed the resilience of people to keep just some element of their culture, even when everything else was stripped away from them through enslavement. Out of that sense of drumming and the use of alternative materials for the act of drumming came about persons finding pieces of metal and then starting to use those to create their rhythms. There's a gentleman by the name of Winston Spree Simon, and he is the one who is credited with creating the first thing that you would know as the steel pan. He's the one who created the first melody pan that carried 8 pitches. And this was around 1930. He discovered by carefully shaping a steel drum and beating on it with different sticks that you could play just the entire that scale. You could have those different pitches, and the sticks were covered in rubber bands to create a note. The pan then evolved into tenor pans for the higher pitches as well as bass drums. And you would have seen in the video at the beginning with the children playing, that difference between the sizes of the drums. You know, the drums are almost bigger than the children. But together, all of these different drums makes up what we would call a steel band. So that's one of the ways in which music came out for that type of expression of the people and their act of resilience and even that act of subversion against being enslaved. Now, I remember the first time I met your program director, Reverend Babu. He was confused. He was like, "You're Indian, aren't you?" I was like, "Kinda, sure." Yes, I am of East Indian descent, but yes, I am in the Caribbean. Why? Because when the British proclaimed emancipation in 1836, there was a need for another labor source. And so a different system came about called indentureship, where persons from India were given a contract to come to the Caribbean, especially to Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. And supposedly they would be able to return to India, or they would be allotted different benefits if they remain through their contract. Whether or not these things held true or a different story, whether or not this was a voluntary system is still up for debate. The one big difference between indentureship and slavery, however, is that those coming from India were allowed to keep their music and their culture, as well as their language. And so Hindi continued to be spoken by the persons who engaged in indentureship and were now living in Trinidad. Both Hinduism as well as Islam came into the Caribbean because of this. So there was that mix now of Roman Catholics from the Spanish, Anglicans from the English who conquered. Well, it wasn't much of a fight for Trinidad. It was almost more like a handing over. Anglican, and then you had the mainstream religions that we know of as now, in terms of Hinduism and Islam, and then came about some of the more syncretic religions, like our spiritual Baptists, that melded some of our African practices with Christianity. And then, of course, there are all the denominations in between. But with all of these mixing and matching almost, Trinidad became a bit of a noisy place. That's as nicely as I can put it, that we are a people who love our music. We are a people who are moved by drumming, by the use of household items like graters along with a fork, persons who make music with a bottle and a spoon, persons who make music with their formal instruments, their dolak and their dantal. We still have all of the traditional as well as all of the created forms of music and instrumentation. And there was also a hierarchy that went into place. Again, I blame colonialism for a lot of things, but that idea of music as something that united us still didn't come about despite our shared love and shared inspiration by music. Again, colonialism. So music-wise, organs, keyboards, guitars, those are the things that, you know, took priority and the things that were appreciated more within a church context. And then you had churches such as my own, the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, that has a unique formation in that the Presbyterianism strand that came to us came, well, out of Switzerland to Scotland, to Canada, and then to Trinidad. So it's Canadian missionaries, as well as some Scottish missionaries who came to Trinidad and Tobago and saw that because the Indian population who now resided here was allowed to keep their religions and cultures, that nobody was ministering to them. And so the Canadian missionaries deliberately targeted our East Indian population to spread the gospel to. And so the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago carries that history with it as quote unquote an Indian church within the Caribbean, because that population was specifically chosen. So imagine you have all of this going on. You have the idea of which instruments are acceptable and consider of a better class than any of the instruments created by or from other nations. And as our church came into being originally, some of the early missionaries made it their business to learn Hindi and translated bhajans for us to learn and to sing. And it's something that carried us through for several years. Our church is now 154 years old. And there are times which we miss our history of that music, of the singing of hymns in Hindi and sometimes in Tamil. But at the same time, we are this melting pot nation of persons from so many different backgrounds, races, cultures, religions. And it became almost a barrier for us to become a more holistic church, a church that really resembles the body of Christ. And if we are to hold on to our tradition too strongly, we would alienate populations that want to be with us, want to be family with us. And so bit by bit, there was the introduction of the steel pan into our churches. Later on, after this lecture, you will hear how that steel band is included within our style of worship. And it truly is a beautiful sound to have children, to have our young people, to have our elders, persons, just finding joy in a national instrument, and an instrument that was not borrowed from someone else, but from that shared history now evolving, and us being able to represent ourselves as Trini, as people from Trinidad and Tobago, and not just transplanted people from Africa, from India, from Europe, from China, from all of these places mixed together, no. But be able to create what our own sound would be like. A couple other instruments joined along the way and got into our music. So djembe drumming is very popular now. It's easy and it's beautiful and it moves us. And also the shak or maracas. And the sound that goes with that is a more Latin sound, which gives us that, just reminds us that Venezuela is just 19 kilometers off our southernmost coast. Venezuela, fun fact, Venezuela is closer to us than Tobago. Tobago is 32 kilometers, but Venezuela is only 19. And it's something that came to the forefront as we had another influx of culture into Trinidad and Tobago, apart from that of colonialism and that of enslavement and that of indentureship, but also the refugee situation in Venezuela has meant at least 20,000 persons coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And maybe for a population like India, that's a small amount. But Trinidad and Tobago is in total about 1.4 million persons. And so it's a significant drop that's now added to a mix. And we're yet to see how this is going to impact on our worship, but definitely looking forward to see how music will be impacted by the influx of Venezuelans into Trinidad and Tobago. So I've talked to you about the Caribbean, how we ended up here, and how music has played that role in our development as a nation and sharing our voice and being that form of us expressing a desire for freedom, a desire of just endurance of what we have gone through as a people, and also how it became part of our worship, part of the way in which we express ourselves in our truest forms. With the pandemic, however, came a silence that was deeply disturbing. So I know I think some of your previous lecturers would have talked about a lot of the positives that come with silence. And of course, there is a beauty in the contemplation and the solitude and the ability for us to reflect when there is that absence of noise. And as I said, we are noisy people. And so when COVID really hit us and lockdowns began, and persons were not able to gather with their friends, persons were not able to gather in churches, persons were not able to gather for any of our carnival functions, to have regular parties and things like that. All of that music came to a very abrupt stop. And not just the big events or a formal type of setting that music would be played at. No, we're a people that play music from our cars and our homes to the entire neighborhood to hear. And all of that came to a stop. And the silence that came at that time resembled more closely almost some fear and the eeriness of sensory deprivation, because music was the thing that makes us feel alive. Music is the thing that vibrates in our bodies and our spirits. When that music stopped, it became something very jarring for all of us. So in our private settings, in our public settings, that silence became a signal that something is wrong, terribly, terribly wrong. And different persons reacted differently to it in terms of whether it was, a welcome respite from all of the noisiness of Trinidad and Tobago. But in my own experiences, working in mission across the Caribbean, I have seen how different countries approach just that music as well as that silence. And for instance, Jamaica, as renowned as it is for its beautiful and it's really moving type of music. In most of Jamaica, rural Jamaica, there is silence. You hear maybe one bird, if that much. But there is not even nature. sometimes comes out. Same thing goes for Guyana. That, of course, in your more rural areas, when you're closer to the more forested sections, you do hear the forests and the creatures and all of the noises that come with it. And for some, that brings a level of comfort and a level of peace. But for others, including myself, I don't really need to hear it. I much prefer music and the sound of music, intentional music, whether it comes from that formal source or informal source. And so as we think about just what that sound of music has meant to us and how silence then impacted on us, another aspect came up for us. And that is the way in which we tried to recapture music. Though we are apart, though we were unable to physically be with the people who we would make music with, we used technology. We found ways to record. We found ways to use soundtracks from online. We found ways to mix music and produce music that was uniquely us, to ensure that the feeling of community remained, even though we were separate. And in some cases, we were successful. But in other cases, music became less of that communal activity and more of an individual one. So for the example of church, because we could not have choirs, and because persons really couldn't gather to practice even if you were in an instrumental band, it would be soloists or persons doing instrumentals as just a single persons. That would be what was recorded, what was shown, what was played for worship, and all of the communal work that would have gone into a choir singing together and learning a piece together, and that beauty of making music together and having our hearts in sync as we breathe together and sing the same notes. All of that is lost when music is just done by one person. That was definitely one of the losses that we had during the pandemic, the communal nature of music. But as we move into a different phase now, and I'm coming to a close shortly, as we move into this different phase and we are opening back up, it has been a true joy to see and to hear our choirs. Even if it's nothing fancy, it's just, even if it's persons singing in unison and it's 4 persons just croaking their lives out, that's fine. But we know the joy that comes with that music together and the rich history that has come out of us being able to openly use our music and share our music and our songs. Another part of our history that I've omitted that has gone along with our steel pan is the culture of carnival. So carnival would be the wording we use for Mardi Gras. You might know one of these terms. And one of the reasons for carnival, the evolution of carnival, is again that subversiveness against enslavement. Persons would create music and songs to secretly insult slave owners and the planter class. And the style of music that came out of it would have been calypso and kaiso. And that then evolved into a type of social commentary. And then it evolved into a more partying type of music with soca. But again, all of these forms of music were meant to be done together or for an audience, or as that way of expressing our communal feelings and allowing our deepest and most spiritual selves to come out. So as I close now, I just want you to think, or I hope that you understand this a little bit better of how much music means to us in the Caribbean. And it could be lively music, it could be sad music, it could be the drumming of African drums, it could be the drumming of our Indian drums, so we would call it tassa. It could be the drumming from our steel pans. It could be the way in which we mix all of the above and create our very unique orchestras, whoever has any type of instrument. Or it could be just within the home, within a group of friends, or within an extended family coming together and deciding, here what, you take a bottle of spoon, you have the grater, you have a small guitar, no problem. And then everybody makes that music together. So I hand you over now to my colleague, Reverend Adrian Sunarine. He's the principal at our seminary here in Trinidad and Tobago, the St. Andrew's Theological College. And I encourage you to ask him questions and just figure out a little bit more about just the damage sometimes that silence does and the beauty of making music together. Thank you and have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you very much, dear brothers. I'm sure we have enjoyed the role of music, rather the sound of silence on the role of music in the pandemic. And the Reverend Sanya has done justice on the same topic from the Caribbean context. At this point in time, I'm allowing any person who has a question, you can raise those questions, and the Reverend Adrian will attend to them accordingly. So it's basically a time of questions, concerns, additions. So anyone who has a question, we have that time that has been set to all of us to raise questions. And I'm sure the Reverend Adrian is more than willing to attend to those questions that will be raised. Questions, questions.
Sukumar. I see Reverend Sukumar has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
Reverend Sanya, for the fantastic presentation. I'm also doing the history of migration. From my village, from Andhra Pradesh, people migrated to Fiji Islands as well as Caribbean Islands. Me and Reverend Josphat Sinkara were in Fiji Islands. We are yet to plan to come to Caribbean. I'm interested to know from Reverend Adrian Sunaran how those migration took place after they joined there. Just now Sanya also shared those linguistic and religious and musical ideologies have been changing and emerging. How you maintain such a multicultural? It's beautiful to listen such a musical story from your context. I'm curious to listen how migrations takes place in the history of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you so much.
That's a very profound question, which would require so many opinions and so many long answers. But as Reverend Sanya mentioned, migration took place after the abolition of slavery, when people from India were brought to Trinidad and Tobago. And their music and their culture influenced a lot of life in Trinidad and Tobago. When the Presbyterian missionaries came from Canada, the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago developed mostly from the mission to the people who had been brought from India. And these missionaries got songs that were either written for Indian people, so for example, my grandparents, when they went to church, they would sing in Hindi. Their worship was in Hindi, not in English. The missionaries learned Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam. And then because Hindi was more widespread, they encouraged all the East Indian immigrants to learn Hindi, and they taught Hindi in schools. And then after a while, Hindi was replaced by English. But there had been music in Hindi throughout all our churches. So my grandparents, when they would go to church, they would sing songs like, well, one of them was, for example, about singing the name of Jesus. So it went like, Isunama, Isunama, Isunama Gaure, Isunama, Isunam, Isunama Gunanadar, Madara Magranta Taure. And there were other songs they would sing like Jesus Saved My Life, which was Isu Masi Mero Prana Bachaya, Prana Bachaya, Isu Masi Jo Papi Isu Kane Awe, Jo Papi Isu Kane Awe. And those were songs that had come from India. And there are songs about Jesus and saving people from sin. Eventually, those songs were supplemented by translations of English songs into Hindi. So for example, What a Friend We Have in Jesus was translated Isu Kya Hin Pyar Butter, and other songs, other well-known hymns, and well-known Christmas carols. O Come All Ye Faithful was Abba O Bishwashi O Jai Jai Karte Ao Amao Habsara En Baitle Hamko Charni Mendeko Mahima Karaja, and so forth. So English songs were translated into Hindi and taught throughout our church. And migration, therefore, had a tremendous impact on the language that was used, and, as Reverend Sanya mentioned, the musical instruments, because many of our churches would try to use the dolak, the tassa, some would use the sitar, the harmonium, and sometimes those are still used today. I know that's a long and a varied kind of answer to your question, but if there's any other information I can add, let me know.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a fantastic answer indeed.
Thank you so much. Do we still have more questions? It's time for questions.
Well,
Okay.
I see Tanmin, look.
Yeah, may I? Yes. Yeah, I would like to thank Reverend Sanya for the very beautiful presentations. And I am curious to know, Reverend Adrian, the role of folk songs in the worship at the present day in the Caribbean context. Because the reason why I raise this question is I am from the northeastern part of India. I belong to the tribal community, and we do have a folk songs. But then after we embrace Christianity, the influence on Western missionary is very strong. Of course, they brought the gospel, and then we learned the gospel songs from them. And all the beautiful folk songs that we have are all almost lost. And we are in the position even difficult to trace them back. So is people from the Caribbean also experience the same, or all those folk songs still preserved? Just would like to, know.
That's a great question, because I think there is a lot of there's a lot of interest in searching for old folk songs, as you say, and for old music. Because when the missionaries came, there was the spreading of the gospel and the introduction of a lot of Western music, Western songs, and also with the Caribbean, every island is a world. Every island is very different. Trinidad is very different from the rest of the Caribbean because we have about half of our population descended from people who came from India. And because of that, when those of us whose ancestors came from India think about ancestral music, we would think about the songs that our grandparents and great-grandparents brought from India, and we would think about those melodies. However, within Trinidad and Tobago, we also have people who came from Africa and China and other parts of the world. Right now, there's so much interest among the younger people in the world that they see over the internet and in popular culture that I agree with you. A lot of the old folk music is very difficult to find now. And a lot of the older music is fading away because in modern times now, the younger people know what is on YouTube. They know what is on the internet and Netflix, and they see what is in the culture around there. And the old folk music, a lot of people don't know those tunes anymore. And the younger people, when they hear it, they will think, ah, my grandparents used to sing something like that, but that's not my thing. Now I'm interested in what America is sending me on YouTube and the latest thing. So I think the same thing has happened here, yes, that a lot of the old tunes, a lot of the old music has been lost over the years.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe I can add up something over the section that was, and what is it that is being done to help maintain the old music that was there? Because I should believe that there's something that the younger generation should also learn from the same. How are you branding the two, the modern music and the old music? Because I'm sure they are made up of two groups, the young and the old. What is it that you are doing, Reverend Adrian, to address that issue?
A good question. And yes, there's the young and the old, and there are also many different cultures within Trinidad and Tobago. So for example, most of the people in the Presbyterian church would be descendants of people who had come from India, but not all. We also have people in our church whose ancestors came from Africa, China, Europe, and we have many people who are mixed. So although we will teach sometimes the old music and songs that were sung years ago and tunes that used to exist and used to be the backbone of culture in times gone by, I think we also have to be very sensitive both to the multi-ethnic and multiracial nature of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to be sensitive in teaching the young people about the past, but also caring with them and caring for them and developing an awareness that the future may be different. So for example, right now in Trinidad and Tobago, there is a great interest and there are many songs that are in Spanish. There's parang, which is a type of music that is very popular, especially at Christmas time, but there are many songs that are in Spanish. And that's because the proximity to South America has given us a lot of Spanish music, and also the migration from Venezuela has led to changes in our wider society, which we are also seeing in the church, where we have Spanish music and a Spanish influence. So in some ways, culture and music are evolving, but it is important, I agree with you, Reverend Sinkara, that it is important to teach and to appreciate the past, as well as to learn about what's happening in the present and where we will go in the future. There's a lot of work we have to do, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate for that response. Do we have some more questions? Do we have some more questions for participants? It's time that we're having questions. We've just heard on the sound of silence on the role of music from the Caribbean islands, that is Trinidad and Tobago context. Do we have any reflections, any questions?
Reverend
See a
Sinkara,
question on the, oh, sorry. I
I'm
was just
sorry.
seeing something on the chat, but go ahead.
I'm mentioning the chat only, so you please address the chat, please.
Oh, yes, I'm seeing something from Samuel on the chat about, do the Caribbean islands have common music? There is some music that is shared among the Caribbean. So for example, there are many rhythms that are similar with Jamaican reggae and with music in Trinidad. And there are calypso rhythms that are well known. But I think they are popular and they are shared. So they may not necessarily come from a common background, but they are so well known and so popular that people borrow music from other countries and people share music. So that's part of the marvel of modern technology, that we can listen to each other's music and enjoy it, and then we can have that and incorporate it as part of our own culture, and we can absorb it into our own tradition and use it also.
Thank you so much. Do we have some more questions? Any questions and reflection? Any questions and reflections? Any questions? Do we have people that still have questions? Or any reflections from what has been shared so far, from what has been lectured by our dear Reverend Sanya? Okay, thank you so much. Reverend Adrian, maybe as people are preparing to bring out more instructions and questions, I want to find out how is the current situations, because in the lecture we were told that there was some music that was demonized, especially that one that involves the playing of drums. How is the current situations now? Because I'm sure with the introductions of keyboard and what we may term as English drums, how is the current scenario as at now? Do we still have that music that was demonized? And what is it that the church is doing to help people appreciate music, whether with drums or keyboards?
Yes, for some years, the pattern of drumming that had been brought from Africa was seen as something that could cause people to create social chaos. So some of it was illegal for some years. But then that ban was lifted after some time, and people were allowed to worship with the drums and with ringing of bells and certain other things. And in some churches today, they worship with those drums and bells. And in Trinidad and Tobago, appreciating the multicultural nature of the society is often a challenge because people would like to stay within their own culture and they know where they have come from, but hearing something else can make them feel a little uncomfortable. So it is important for us to learn about another culture, learn about their struggle and their sacrifice and what they had to go through, and then to listen to their music, because very often their music would have begun as something that was subversive and radical. And in listening to that and in appreciating the stories, the journeys of other people, we also learn so much about ourselves, because we can recognize, for instance, that the people who were brought from India, their musical instruments and their language were sometimes seen as inferior. And people would make fun of them and they would make fun of the food they ate. So for example, people from India who would go to school, they would carry different food from Westerners. And the Indian children who went to school, just as people would make fun of their music, they would make fun of the unusual food that these children would bring to school. Things like roti, the Indian breads, and dal, and things like that. So an appreciation for other cultures is very crucial, especially in a multicultural place like Trinidad and Tobago. And it's something that we try to do in church as we celebrate and we make people aware of other cultures at different times of the year. In Trinidad, for example, we have Emancipation Day as a public holiday. And at Emancipation Day and around Emancipation time, which is the 1st of August, we try our best to promote an understanding of the various African cultures that came to Trinidad and Tobago. When the spiritual shouter Baptists were allowed to practice their religion with their drums and bells, that day later became a public holiday also called Shouter Baptist Liberation Day. And around that time, we think about their struggle and their music and what it meant to them. And we think about in our lives what that can teach us. And then at the end of May, there's a day that is remembered as Indian Arrival Day, which is also a public holiday. And that day in May is the day in which the first ship carrying people who were brought from India to Trinidad and Tobago arrived in Trinidad. And that day is a public holiday. So on that day, there are many educational programs teaching people about the contribution that was made by people who came from India. And it's also on that day that in our church, we try our best to learn some of the songs that our ancestors would have sung or that the missionaries would have taught in Hindi in the old days.
Thank you so much. We have a time of reflections and questions. Do we have any other questions before I hand over to Reverend Babu for conclusions? Do we have more questions? Any questions and any reflections? Okay. Thank you so much for the time that we have shared together. As moderator, I'm so grateful, to the Reverend Adrian for responses that have been shared so far. I think I've learned quite a number of things from the Trinidad and Tobago context, in as far as the sound of silence on the role of music in the pandemic is concerned. I hand over to Sukuma for conclusions. Sukuma, over to you.
Thank you so much. How excellent to listen such an amazing lecture from Caribbean Islands. Thanks to Reverend Sanya, Beharry for the fantastic and soul-stirring presentation. I feel I'm already in Caribbean Islands. I'm in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, ma'am, Sanya ma'am, for presenting such an amazing lecture, for an inspirational lecture. You have unpacked a number of things: music, history, mission history, colonialism, cultures, traditions, languages, religions, migrations, and stories of hope. You touched our hearts and minds. It's a great feast for all our minds. Thank you so much, Reverend Sanya Beharry, for the fantastic presentation. I also thank Reverend Adrian D. Sunarain, sir, the principal of St. Andrew's Theological College in Trinidad and Tobago in Caribbean Islands. Thank you so much, Reverend Adrian, for joining with us and sharing the wealth of knowledge you have, the ocean of wisdom you have. It means a lot. Thank you for spending time. Thank you for the connection. We look forward to have partnership with your institution as well. We're extremely delighted to have you, sir. I thank the moderator, Reverend Josphat Sinkara, who joined with us from the Republic of Zambia. Thank you so much, Reverend Josphat Sinkara, for meticulously moderating this session in an amazing way. Thanks to you and your family members. I also thanks to Professor Mario Sixto Gonanzias, a professor from Argentina, university professor. Thank you so much, Professor Mario, for offering word of prayer. I also thank the director of Ecumenical Christian Center, Professor Reverend Dr. Shampi Thomas Achin, who is the mastermind, he designed all these programs. He's behind all these programs. He's a backbone, he's a foundation. With his prayers and guidance, we are doing all these programs thanks to Professor Reverend Dr. Shampi Thomas Achin. I also thank Deputy Director of Ecumenical Christian Center, Tanmanjan Bepe, a genius and a brilliant who is helping us and guiding us. Thank you so much, sir, for all your kind help. I thank all the participants for joining with us, and it means a lot. The question for your assignment is, how music and silence have been shaped and emerged in the pandemic in Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in Caribbean Islands. Our next webinar will be on the 25th of April 2022. This webinar will be on the theme Sound of Silence and the Role of Music in the Pandemic from Fijian context. Reverend Wilfred Salaisa Regunamada will be presenting this lecture from Fijian context. I look forward to seeing you all, and we'll play the postlude song. It's a Hallelujah chorus. Let us listen and depart from here.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you very much indeed.